السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نور وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله. Law 9 of our series this week of 48 Laws of Power. Win through actions, never through argument. And this is quite ironic that I'm doing this chapter today, considering I just had an argument with someone myself earlier. And whilst I was having this argument, I was recalling this chapter, thinking to myself, look how futile, look how useless this argument is. SubhanAllah. So, comes as a timely reminder. If you're just joining now, please hit that like. Barakallahu fikum. Helps with the algorithm. As I say, I'll give you my weekly disclaimer, as I always do. This book was written by a non-Muslim, an atheist at that. It is not divine revelation. There will be problems. There will be mistakes from a perspective of its adopting it as Muslims, adopting the laws and the rules as Muslims. And I say to you this, whenever you find a law that you find to be problematic from a Dini perspective, good. Learn it so that you can arm yourself and protect yourself from what others might try to use on you. Now, this law today is a very beneficial law to implement. And like I say, it's ironic because I've just had a verbal spat, a verbal disagreement with someone myself. And whilst I was having that verbal spat, that verbal disagreement, I was just thinking to myself, this is such a futile, useless exchange of words. Because, and let me share something else with you. I bumped into someone the other day that I have had an online debate with, and he made a very, very interesting point to me, observation that I didn't realize. He said to me, Mahdi, when we had that debate, I don't actually believe in the things that I was defending, the points that I was defending. I was like, what? This is ludicrous. What are you talking about? He said to me, I felt backed into a corner, and to preserve my ego, I'm paraphrasing now, he didn't actually use the words ego, but from what I understood what he was saying, in order to preserve my ego, I ended up defending something that I fundamentally disagree with in the first place. And that was very interesting. Now, of course, we have these debates online, and I entertain these debates online for the purpose of the audience, for it to be a learning factor, a learning curve. But I have to tell you, in real life, whenever people try to have these discussions with me, I really let it go. Honestly, I was like, is it really? Do you think that? Yeah, maybe you got a point there. I let it go because arguments, words are useless. Argumentation is useless. And most of the time, people are putting up defenses to preserve their ego, not because they genuinely believe in the defense of their point. They are worried that if you embarrass them by proving to them that they're wrong, that you are essentially insulting their intelligence, which it is in a way. That's what debates do. It is. And if you were to pull me up in the street and try to get into a debate with me in the middle of the street, I'll let you win. Most of the time, I'll let up, be like, yeah, man, you know what? Maybe you got a point. Completely different to how I am online, because I'm not trying to educate you or teach you on the street. And I certainly don't want to offend your ignorance. I try to find more tactful ways of teaching, more subtle ways. Online is a different world. Online is where you sharpen the knife. But in real life, I know the futility of words. So this law is a very, very pertinent law to bear in mind when you're dealing with your loved ones, with your friends, with your families, with your colleagues, at work, in business, in university. So important. And like I said, it comes as a timely reminder for myself as well. Soundboard check. Oh, let's put that sound up. Soundboard check. Let's see now.
Get your face ready. Get your cheeks ready. I'm going to slap you again today.
Soundboard check. Sultan Mahmoud. All right, let's get into it. Win through actions, never through argument. Any momentary triumph you think you have gained through argument is really I think you pronounce this Pyrrhic victory. I'm not too sure what that means. The resentment and ill will you will stir up is stronger and lasts longer than any momentary change of opinion. It is much more powerful to get others to agree with you through your actions without saying a word. Demonstrate, do not explicate. Give me one moment, guys. The heating is really hot. I'm just going to put it down. And what I like about today's law is that there's loads of lovely examples in story form that I'm going to be reading to you to really, bring home what he's trying to talk about here. Stories are the best way to learn. Sultan Muhammad, absolutely. Soundboard check confirmed. Okay. I'm going to read to you a couple of stories in the red highlights here, the side of the page. I'm going to read those to you first before we go into the transgression and observance of the law. Okay. The Sultan and the Vizier. A vizier had served his master for some 30 years and was known and admired for his loyalty, truthfulness, and devotion to God. His honesty, however, had made him many enemies in the court, who spread stories of his duplicity and perfidy. They worked on the Sultan day in and day out until he too came to distrust the innocent vizier, and finally ordered the man who had served him so well to be put to death. This goes back to being aware of the other courtiers in court. Number one, never outshine the master. And number two, be aware of how much you are outshining your fellow courtiers. There are times when you need to dull your brilliant colors so that you don't stir the pot of envy. If you stir the pot of envy, those individuals who envy you might do their best to cause your demise and your downfall, which is exactly what's happening in this story here. In this realm, those condemned to death were tied up and thrown into the pen where the Sultan kept his fiercest hunting dogs. The dogs would promptly tear the victim to pieces before being thrown to the However, before being thrown to the dogs, the vizier asked for one last request. I would like 10 days respite, he said, so that I can pay my debts, collect any money due to me, return items that people have put in my care, and share out my goods among the members of my family and my children, and appoint a guardian for them. After receiving a guarantee that the vizier would not try to escape, the Sultan granted this request. The vizier hurried home, collected 100 gold pieces, and then paid a visit to the huntsman who looked after the Sultan's dogs. He offered this man the 100 gold pieces and said, "Let me look after the dogs for 10 days." The huntsman agreed, and for the next 10 days, the vizier cared for the beasts with great attention, grooming them well and feeding them handsomely. By the end of the 10 days, they were eating out of his hand. On the 11th day, the vizier was called before the Sultan. The charges were repeated, and the Sultan watched as the vizier was tied up and thrown to the dogs. Yet, when the beasts saw him, they ran up to him with wagging tails. They nibbled affectionately at his shoulder and began playing with him. The Sultan and the other witnesses were amazed, and the Sultan asked the vizier why the dogs had spared his life. The vizier replied, "I have looked after these dogs for 10 days. The Sultan has seen the result for himself. I have looked after you for 30 years. And what is the result? I am condemned to death on the strength of accusations brought by my enemies." The Sultan blushed with shame. He not only pardoned the vizier, but gave him a fine set of clothes and handed over to him the men who had slandered his reputation. The noble vizier set them free and continued to treat them with kindness. This is absolutely incredible story. I don't know if it's real or if it's a fable, a fairy tale, a fable, but the lesson, the meaning is profound. The vizier was sentenced to death after serving his master, the Sultan, for 30 years loyally, never betrayed him. And yet he was sentenced to death on the strength of accusations by his enemies, his envious enemies. We shall add to that. What did he do? Did he complain? Did he explain? No. He showed with actions. He took the dogs that were destined to eat him, paid the owner, the huntsman, 100 gold pieces to look after them, For 10 days, he took care of them like they became his best friends, so that when he was tied up and thrown to them to be eaten, they played with him as if they had known him for a long time, because they did, at least for 10 days. And then he showed the Sultan, after the Sultan asked, why didn't they eat you? He said, 10 days I was good to them. For you, 30 years, and this is my reward? Don't demonstrate, explicate. It's an amazing lesson. Right. The Works of Ammasis. Am I reading that one to you? Yes. When Apries had been deposed in the way I have described, Ammasis came to the throne. He belonged to the district of Sais and was a native of the town called Siaf. At first, the Egyptians were inclined to be contemptuous and did not think much of him because of his humble and undistinguished origin. But later on, he cleverly brought them to heel without having recourse to harsh measures. Amongst his innumerable treasures, he had a gold foot bath, which he and his guests used on occasion to wash their feet in. This he broke up, and with the material had a statue made to one of the gods, one of the false ilah, of course, which he then set up in what he thought the most suitable spot in the city. The Egyptians, constantly coming upon the statue, treated it with profound reverence, and as soon as Amasis heard of the effect it had upon them, he called a meeting and revealed the fact that the deeply revered statue was once a foot bath, which they washed their feet and pissed and vomited in. I'm reading that verbatim, by the way. He went on to say that his own case was much the same, in that once he had been only an ordinary person and was now their king, so that just as they had come to revere the transformed foot bath, so they had better pay honor and respect to him too. In this way, the Egyptians were persuaded to accept him as their master. Absolutely incredible. Once again, a brilliant example for the use of metaphors and analogies. And language is highly dependent upon metaphors and analogies, by the way. Communication, if you want to effectively communicate, that will depend on how well your communication or your effective communication is largely dependent upon how well you can integrate metaphors and analogies in your arguments, how well you can tie them in. And sometimes people will try to shoot you down and say, oh, that's a straw man. And sometimes they are straw men, but oftentimes they're not. People are saying that because they don't like what you're saying. Just as here in this instance, he took the foot bath that they used to piss, vomit, and whatever else in, wash their feet in, turned it into one of the statues that they worshipped and revered, and then told them, I was the same. I used to be pissed, vomited, and had my other people's feet washed in, or the equivalent thereof. And now I am in a position where I should be revered. Just as you revered this foot bath, you must revere me as well. That's how you teach a lesson, by providing these intuitive analogies, these out of the box thinking analogies. It's extremely effective. All right, let's get into the transgression of the law. In 131 BC, the Roman consul Publius Crassus Dives Mucianus, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Some of these names are mad. Laying siege to the Greek town of Pergamus, found himself in need of a battering ram to force through the town's walls. He had seen a couple of hefty ships masked in a shipyard in Athens a few days before, and he ordered that the larger of these be sent to him immediately. The military engineer in Athens, who received the order, felt certain that the consul really wanted the smaller of the masts. He argued endlessly with the soldiers who delivered the request. The smaller mast, he told them, was much better suited to the task, and indeed it would be easier to transport. The soldiers warned the engineer that their master was not a man to argue with, but he insisted that the smaller mast would be the only one that would work with the machine he was constructing to go with it. He drew diagram after diagram and went so far as to say that he was the expert and that they had no clue what they were talking about. The soldiers knew their leader and at last convinced the engineer that it would be better to swallow his expertise and obey. Pay attention. Your boss, for example, at work, you know that this particular strategy of yours is the most effective strategy, but your boss is insisting, nope, you got to do it this way. What do? Do you use your strategy or do you do the boss's strategy? Even if your strategy proves to be the correct one, which one should you do if your boss is insisting? I want you to think about that whilst I carry on this story. After they left, though, the engineer thought about it some more. What was the point, he asked himself, in obeying an order that would lead to failure? And so he sent the smaller mast, confident that the consul would see how much more effective it was and reward him justly. When the smaller mast arrived, Mucianus asked his soldiers for an explanation. They described to him how the engineer had argued endlessly for the smaller mast, but had finally promised to send the larger one. Mucianus went into a rage. He could not concentrate on the siege or consider the importance of breaching the walls before the town received reinforcements. All he could think about was the impudent engineer, whom he ordered to be brought to him immediately. Arriving a few days later, the engineer gladly explained to the consul one more time the reasons for the smaller mast. He went on, using the same arguments he had made with the soldiers. He said it was wise to listen to experts in these matters. And if the attack was only tried with the battering ram he had sent, the consul would not regret it. Mucianus let him finish, then had him stripped naked before the soldiers and flogged and scourged with rods until he died. Why? Why? Once again, just as my friend, as I mentioned to you at the beginning of this podcast, who said to me he found himself in one of the debates we had, found himself online, he found himself defending points that he didn't even believe in, just because he felt bullied into a corner by the way I was debating with him. He felt bullied into a corner, and therefore he, in order to preserve and protect the integrity of his ego, he was defending points that he said to me afterwards. I was sick with defending those points. Like, I felt sick afterwards, but it was my ego. Exact same thing. If this engineer had proven to be right, at the same time, if he is right, then it means that the general, who was it, the Roman consul, he would be wrong, which means his intelligence would be offended. Sometimes you have to bend a little, accept, concede, even if it's at the harm of the organization, at the harm of progress, temporary progress, because you're dealing with egos. And egos don't care about right and wrong. Egos only care about themselves, their ego. And this is particularly true with men. And for those ladies who might be watching, you have to be extra careful with how you deal with the ego of your husband. Extra careful. Oh, yes, you better stroke and massage that ego accordingly. Because if you don't, he will make your life miserable. This is especially true for men, but it's true for men and women alike, but especially for men. Very important that you tread carefully around his ego. Be careful. Interpretation. The engineer, whose name has not been recorded by history, had spent his life designing masts and pillars and was respected as the finest engineer in a city that had excelled in the sciences. He knew that he was right. A smaller ram would allow more speed and carry more force. Larger is not necessarily better. So he was fundamentally right. Remember that. He was not wrong. He was right. Of course, the consul would see his logic and would eventually understand that science is neutral and reason superior. How could the consul possibly persist in his ignorance if the engineer showed him detailed diagrams and explained the theories behind his advice? The military engineer was the quintessence of the arguer, a type found everywhere among us. The arguer does not understand that words are never neutral, and that by arguing with the superior, he impugns the intelligence of one more powerful than he. Exactly as I said earlier. He also has no awareness of the person he's dealing with, since each man believes that he is right and words will rarely convince him otherwise. The arguer's reasoning falls on deaf ears. When cornered, he only argues more. Exactly as I said to you with that brother that I had that debate with. When cornered, he only argued more. And that's a fascinating observation for me, a fascinating learning curve, that you have to find a way to help people preserve that vestige of masculine pride, particularly when you're dealing with men. You have to find a way to help people save face even when they're wrong. This is hard because once you've cornered them and, you've proven them wrong, you really want to lay the smack down. That's what you want to do. You want to lay the smack down. But if you do that, you will create enemies. You will create more enemies than winning the argument is actually worth. You see? And this is something, believe me, that I am still learning. I'm sharing it with you, but it's something that I am still learning on a day-to-day basis. Right. He also has no awareness of the person he is dealing with, since each man believes that he's right and words will rarely convince him otherwise. The arguer's reasoning will fall on deaf ears. And when cornered, he only argues more, digging his own grave. Once he has made the other person feel insecure and inferior in his beliefs, the eloquence of Socrates could not save the situation. It is not simply a question of avoiding an argument with those who stand above you. We all believe we are masters in the realm of opinions and reasoning. You must be careful then. Learn to demonstrate the correctness of your ideas indirectly. Indirectly. Bismillah. Observance of the law. In 1502, in Florence, Italy, an enormous block of marble stood in the works department of the church of Santa Maria del Fiore. It had once been a magnificent piece of raw stone, but an unskillful sculptor had mistakenly bored a hole through it where there should have been a figure's legs, generally mutilating it. Piero Soderini, Florence's mayor, had contemplated trying to save the block by commissioning Leonardo da Vinci to work on it, or some other master, but had given up, since everyone agreed that the stone had been ruined. So, despite the money that had been wasted on it, it gathered dust in the dark halls of the church. This was where things stood until some Florentine friends of the great Michelangelo decided to write to the artist, then living in Rome. He alone, they said, could do something with the marble, which was still magnificent raw material. Michelangelo traveled to Florence, examined the stone, and came to the conclusion that he could in fact carve a figure from it by adapting the pose to the way the rock had been mutilated. Soderini argued that this was a waste of time. Nobody could salvage such a disaster, but he finally agreed to let the artist work on it. Michelangelo decided he would depict a young David, sling in hand, David and Goliath. Weeks later, as Michelangelo was putting the final touches on the statue, Soderini entered the studio. Now, remember, because Soderini said to him, you'll never be able to do something with this stone. That's the first thing. So if Michelangelo was to succeed, it would mean by default that Soderini would fail, because Soderini said this is unsalvageable. That's the first point. Weeks later, as Michelangelo was putting the final touches on the statue, Soderini entered the studio. Fancying himself a bit of a connoisseur, he studied the huge work and told Michelangelo that whilst he thought it was magnificent, the nose, he judged, was too big. Michelangelo realized that Soderini was standing in a place right under the giant figure and did not have the proper perspective. Did he tell him that? Did Michelangelo say to Soderini, no, you're standing in the wrong place. You're mistaken. If you stand over here, which is where everyone else will see it, you'll see that it doesn't look, it's not out of proportion. Did he say that? Let's find out. Without a word, Michelangelo gestured for Soderini to follow him up the scaffolding. Reaching the nose, he picked up a chisel as well as a few bits of marble dust that lay on the planks. With Soderini just a few feet below him on the scaffolding, Michelangelo started to tap lightly with the chisel, letting the bits of dust he had gathered in his hand to fall little by little. He actually did nothing to change the nose, but gave every appearance of working on it. After a few minutes of this charade, he stood aside. Look at it now. I like it better, replied Soderini. You've made it come alive. Interpretation. Michelangelo knew that by changing the shape of the nose, he might ruin the entire sculpture. But Soderini was a patron who prided himself on his aesthetic judgment. For Michelangelo to disagree would be to indirectly insult Soderini's aesthetic judgment, to make a claim in some way that actually Soderini doesn't have any type of aesthetic, isn't any type of skill in aesthetic judgments whatsoever. So Michelangelo was concerning himself with, how do I preserve this man's pride whilst not ruining the sculpture at the same time? This is a flipping art. This is a flipping art. So Soderini was a patron who prided himself on his aesthetic judgment. To offend such a man by arguing would not only gain Michelangelo nothing, it would put future commissions in jeopardy. Michelangelo was far too clever to argue. His solution was to change Soderini's perspective, literally bringing him closer to the nose, without making him realize that this was the cause of his misperception. Mad. Fortunately for posterity, Michelangelo found a way to keep the perfection of the statue intact, whilst at the same time making Soderini believe he had improved it. Such is the double power of winning through actions rather than argument. No one is offended, and your point is proven. Amazing story, right? Incredible story. We have 16 of you in here, 15 of you in here right now. And how many likes do we have? Let's see. 13 likes. That's not bad. For the 2 of you who haven't hit the like, hit that like, please. Barakallahu fikum. Keys to power. And you know what? Let's just spend some time on that before we go into it. Michelangelo made this realization that this man, he's paying me to sculpt this statue, number one. Soderini was the patron. He was the patron. So this man pays my wages, number one. Number two, Soderini also believed that this sculpture was unsalvageable. Point number two, which means that if Michelangelo did salvage it, immediately this means Soderini was wrong to a point, even though he was paying for it to be done. So once Soderini saw that Michelangelo was actually making something magnificent out of this defective sculpture, quote unquote, he needed to find a way to preserve his pride, to preserve his what's the word I'm looking for? His self-image, that he was a man of great taste and superior aesthetic judgment. He may well have not even thought that there was anything wrong with the nose, but wanted to impose his point anyway. Michelangelo did not fight him. He entertained him. He picked up a few bits of dust from one of the planks of wood and pretended to chip away whilst dropping dust at the same time and not affecting the shape of the nose in the slightest. That is hikmah. That is mad. Sultan, I appreciate it, my man. Annie, appreciate it. Thank you, Annie. Annie Noni, thank you. Yes, smash that like button. Let's help our brother Mahdi. Shukran, Habibi. I appreciate it, Sultan. Keys to power. In the realm of power, you must learn to judge your moves by their long-term effects on other people. Excuse me, I got a sneeze. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. In the realm of power, you must learn to judge your moves by their long-term effects on other people. The problem in trying to prove a point or gain a victory through argument is that in the end, you can never be certain how it affects the people you are arguing with. They may appear to agree with you politely, but inside, they may even resent you. Why? Because you have proven to them that they were wrong and therefore they were ignorant. Even though we all make mistakes and we're all wrong at times, none of us likes to be shown up. None of us. Ego. And we all have it. And if you really want to get your way with people and progress and accumulate power for yourself, to use it positively, of course, you need to know how to perform this tap dance around the egos of people. And the more important people you start dealing with, the better you better get with this tap dance. Otherwise, your fall from grace will be imminent. Ego, subhanAllah. Or perhaps something you said inadvertently even offended them. Words have that insidious ability to be interpreted according to the other person's mood and insecurities. Even the best argument has no solid foundation, for we have all come to distrust the slippery nature of words. And days after agreeing with someone, we often revert to our old opinion out of sheer habit. How useless arguments are. Subhanallah. Understand this. Words are a dime a dozen. Everyone knows that in the heat of an argument, we will all say anything to support our cause. We'll quote the Bible, refer to unverifiable statistics. Who can be persuaded by such bags of air like that? Action and demonstration are much more powerful and meaningful. They are there before our eyes for us to see. Yes, now the statue's nose does look just right. There are no offensive words, no possibility of misinterpretation. No one can argue with a demonstrated proof. As Baltasar Gracian remarks, the truth is generally seen, rarely heard. And this is certainly the case between human beings. Taban, of course, don't take this to an Aqidah standpoint. No, we don't see Allah and therefore we shouldn't believe in him. Be careful. Use your common sense. All right? Use your common sense. Generally speaking, between human beings, when we're arguing, generally speaking, this is the case. The truth is generally seen, rarely heard. Sir Christopher Wren was, at least when we're talking about non-religious matters. Okay? I'm trying to be careful here. Sir Christopher Wren was England's version of the Renaissance man. He had mastered the sciences of mathematics, astronomy, physics, and physiology. Yet during his extremely long career as England's most celebrated architect, he was often told by his patrons to make impractical changes in his designs. Never once did he argue or offend. He had other ways of proving his point. In 1688, Wren designed a magnificent town hall for the city of Westminster. The mayor, however, was not satisfied. In fact, he was nervous. He told Wren he was afraid the second floor was not secure and that it could all come crashing down on his office on the first floor. He demanded that Wren add 2 stone columns for extra support. Wren, the consummate engineer, knew that these columns would serve no purpose and that the mayor's fears were baseless. But build them he did, and the mayor was grateful. It was only years later that workmen on a high scaffold saw the columns stopped just short of the ceiling. They were dummies. Both men got what they wanted. The mayor could relax, and Wren knew posterity would understand that his original design worked and the columns were unnecessary because they weren't supporting jack all. The power of demonstrating your idea is that your opponents do not get defensive and are therefore more open to persuasion. Making them literally and physically feel your meaning is infinitely more powerful than argument. A heckler once interrupted Nikita Khrushchev in the middle of a speech in which he was denouncing the crimes of Stalin. "You were a colleague of Stalin's," the heckler yelled. "Why didn't you stop him then?" Khrushchev apparently could not see the heckler and barked out, "Who said that?" No hands went up. No one moved a muscle. And after a few seconds of tense silence, Khrushchev finally said in a quiet voice, "Now you know why I didn't stop him." That same man who said, "You were a colleague of Stalin's, why didn't you stop him?" Khrushchev immediately used that as an opportunity to put him on the spot. "Who said that?" he barked. Nobody responded. That man couldn't even so much as put his hand up to say, yeah, it was me. Never mind, stop a man like Stalin. He showed him in that moment why he was unable to stop Stalin. By proving it, demonstrating instead of explicating, instead of getting defensive and saying, well, Stalin was this and Stalin was that, and he should have done this. He put him on the spot immediately and shut him down one time.
Get your face ready. Get your cheeks ready. I'm going to slap you again today.
Instead of just arguing that anyone facing Stalin was afraid, knowing that the slightest sign of rebellion would mean certain death, he had made them feel what it was like to face Stalin, had made them feel the paranoia, the fear of speaking up, the terror of confronting the leader, in this case, Khrushchev. The demonstration was visceral, and no more argument was necessary. The most powerful persuasion goes beyond action into symbol. The power of a symbol, a flag, a mythic story, a monument to some emotional event is that everyone understands you without anything being said. In 1975, when Henry Kissinger was engaged in some frustrating negotiations with the Israelis over the return of part of the Sinai Desert that they had seized in the 1967 war, he suddenly broke off a tense meeting and decided to do some sightseeing, quote unquote. He paid a visit to the ruins of the ancient fortresses of Masada, known to all Israelis as the place where 700 Jewish warriors committed mass suicide in AD 73, rather than give in to the Roman troops besieging them. The Israelis instantly understood the message of Kissinger's visit, his sightseeing. He was indirectly accusing them of courting mass suicide. Although the visit did not by itself change their minds, it made them think far more seriously than any direct warning would have. Symbols like this carry great emotional significance. Ani Noni, you disarm your... Let's have a look at this comment here. You disarm your opponents by permitting them their own flawed design. In essence, yes, by mirroring to them with an actual example of what it is they are saying. Demonstrate, don't explicate. But this is really hard, and you have to be able to think, to have that agility of thought. That's what it requires, agility of thought, to think creatively, especially on the stop like Khrushchev did. It's hard. It's very hard. Thank you for liking Annie, by the way. When aiming for power or trying to conserve it, always look for the indirect route and choose your battles carefully. If it does not matter in the long run whether the other person agrees with you or if time and their own experience will make them understand what you mean, then it is best not even to bother with a demonstration. Save your energy and walk away. Nurul, much appreciate this, my man. Thank you. Thank you, Habibi. I appreciate I haven't received the super chat on 48 Laws of Power for a minute, for a good few weeks. Thank you, Nurul. Much appreciated, my man. Jazakallah khair. I'm glad you appreciate this. Right. The image, as you know, at the conclusion of each law, Robert Greene has an image for you to, literally an image for you to be able to recall the law by. So a picture, a painting, an object, something, an image of some sort so that you can recall what the law is referring to. And the image here is the seesaw. Up and down go the arguers, getting nowhere fast. Get off the seesaw and show them your meaning without kicking or pushing. Leave them at the top and let gravity bring them gently to the ground. Authority. Never argue. In society, nothing must be discussed. Give only results. Benjamin Disraeli. Reversal. Once again, most of these laws that we will go through have a reversal, an exception to the rule, a time when implementing that rule could be detrimental to you. Some laws don't have a reversal, but they are few and far between. This one has a reversal. Verbal argument has one vital use in the realm of power. to distract and cover your tracks when you are practicing deception or are caught in a lie. All right, this is where you have to be careful, guys, now, okay? Learn this so that you know what other people might be doing to you. In such, I do apologize about that, by the way. I just burped right into the mic. I just had dinner. In such cases, it is to your advantage to argue with all the conviction you can muster. Draw the other person into an argument to distract them from your deceptive move. When caught in a lie, the more emotional and certain you appear, the less likely it seems you are lying. I will say to you this, by the way, and you have to be careful with this. This is where I slightly disagree here. If you are, you shouldn't be lying in the first place, but even when you are not lying, when you are emotionally defending a point and trying really hard to disprove them, you make the other person wonder, why is he trying so hard? If he's not lying, why is he getting so emotional? So this is by the way the fifth time I've gone through this book, and I'm starting to pick apart the things that I, bones of contention, if you like, areas that I don't necessarily agree with. This is one of them. So do with that what you please. This technique has saved the hide of many a con artist. Once, Count Victor Lustig, swindler par excellence, had sold dozens of suckers around the country a phony box which he claimed to be able to copy money. Discovering their mistake, the suckers generally chose not to go to the police rather than risk the embarrassment of publicity. But one Sheriff Richards of Ramsden County, Oklahoma, was not the kind of man to accept being conned out of $10,000. And one morning, he tracked Lustig down to a hotel in Chicago. And on that note, by the way, this is something that I picked up from Darren Hardy, famous entrepreneur. His most famous book that he's known for is The Compound Effect and Success Magazine. And I picked this up from him. And you know what? It was profound. He said, instead of reading 30 books a year, why not pick one book and read it 30 times? And you know what? There are a great many good books that I've read and thoroughly enjoyed, only to never read them again and then forget the vast majority of what I read. And again, he used an analogy. He said, when you find a vein of gold, mine that gold for all it's worth. Mine that ground, mine it, dig it for all the gold it contains. Don't spend one session, 1 hour, 1 day digging it and then go off and try to find a new vein of gold to dig somewhere else. No, mine the whole thing out. So what I've started doing more recently, instead of trying to read as many different books as possible, which was what my strategy was before, I read as many different books as possible, but the moment I come across a book that was really wow, I will read it again and 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 again. Like I said, this is the fifth time that I'm going through 48 Laws of Power myself. I will probably go through this book. I've said to myself, I have to read this book 50 times in order to be able to fully master it, but a minimum of 10 times. Because the first time you go through a book like this, and there's a few books that I've read, like The Laws of Human Nature is the same thing. The first time you go through a book like this, you're blown away with how little you know and how ignorant you are. But then if you don't read it again, you'll forget about it. So you do need to read good books, the really good ones, over and over and over, and study them and take notes and memorize and learn and so on. Don't take it casually. If you really want to improve, if you really want to develop, don't take it casually. Don't take it lightly. I was going to say something. What's I going to say? Okay, yeah, let's continue. Lustig heard a knock on the door. Okay, so you forgot one. One Sheriff Richards of Ramsden County, Oklahoma, was not the kind of man to accept being conned out of $10,000. And one morning, he tracked Lustig down to a hotel in Chicago. Lustig heard a knock on the door. And when he opened it, he was looking down the barrel of a gun. What seems to be the problem? He calmly asked. You son of a bitch, yelled the sheriff. I'm going to kill you. You conned me with that damn box of yours. Lustig feigned confusion. You mean it's not working? He asked. You know it's not working, replied the sheriff. But that's impossible, said Lustig. There's no way it couldn't be working. Did you operate it properly? I did exactly what you told me to do, said the sheriff. No, you must have done something wrong, said Lustig. The argument went in circles, and the barrel of the gun was gently lowered. Lustig next went to phase 2. Lustig, by the way, Victor Lustig, he sold the Eiffel Tower no less than 3 times, on this massive con where he convinced these wealthy aristocrats that he was a government official, and he sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal, supposedly, 3 times. And once they took those papers to the actual government, they got nothing. So he was a world-renowned swindler, con man. Yellow Kid Whale is another one as well. The barrel of the gun was gently lowered. Lustig next went to phase 2 in the argument tactic. He poured out a whole bunch of technical gobbledygook about the box's operation, completely beguiling the sheriff, who now appeared less sure of himself and argued less forcefully. Look, said Lustig, I'll give you your money back right now. I'll also give you written instructions on how to work the machine, and I'll even come out to Oklahoma to make sure it's working properly. There's no way you can lose on that. Lustig took out 100 $100 bills and gave them to him, telling him to relax and have a fun weekend in Chicago. Calmer and a little confused, the sheriff finally left. Over the next few days, Lustig checked the paper every morning. He finally found what he was looking for: a short article reporting Sheriff Richards' arrest, trial, and conviction for passing counterfeit notes. Lustig had won the argument. The sheriff never bothered him again. He actually gave the sheriff fake counterfeit notes to go and spend, and the sheriff was arrested accordingly. That's a good story to bear in mind if you're dealing with individuals who you suspect might be trying to con you out of something. Bear that in mind. Con men, they are some of the best at the art of persuasion and convincing you and beguiling you. I've dealt with people like this myself in the business world. People who pile on the technical gobbledygook. There's a term for it. It's called baffling with bullshit. Burn that one into your brain. Whenever you hear someone trying to baffle you with bullshit, close down the memory banks, the memory walls, the security walls to your mind, and just shut them out. Let them finish their speech. No need to be rude. Don't burn bridges unnecessarily, and keep it moving. I've dealt with people like that. Baffling with bullshit. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Ammar, do you read multiple books at the same time? Yes, because I listen. So when I'm out and about, walking, traveling, and so on, I listen to a book on Audible, and then when I'm at home or I'm on, when the time, usually in the bathroom as well, on the toilet, frankly, that's when I'll read an actual hard book. But more and more I'm starting to stick to Audible because you can play the book faster. I have found though, if you play the book too fast, you don't absorb it. So it's a delicate dance between trying to read as much as possible and then actually trying to learn at the same time. But the best books I read over and 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 over until I've mined all the gold out of them, everything. And this is how you develop. And remember, guys, the more value you add up here to the meat that's in between your ears, the more valuable you become. I'm seeing this play out in my own life personally right now, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. I'm dealing with certain individuals that I didn't think I would deal with maybe just a couple of years ago, because they are valuing what's up here. And that's from me putting in the work. You can also do the same. I am not special. Tamam. Jazakumullah khair. Appreciate you guys coming on. Nurul, once again, thank you for the £8.99 super chat. I'll catch you guys on the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.